Archie, thank you very much, and thank you very much to the Racing Foundation for inviting me to speak today. I was reflecting on what Tansy said right at the beginning. I do know 15 million people must have reflected that they could have spent a lot better 90 minutes than watching England play Serbia. So there's a big market out there. But let's get straight into what data there is about what relates to the public perception of horses in sport. And obviously, Nevin's already talked about this with some data that's obviously been validated by his late maths teacher. But in the May 2024 World Horse Welfare, in May 2024, World Horse Welfare commissioned YouGov to conduct a survey of a representative sample of over 4,000 members of the British public. And this highlighted, reflected in Nevin's data, that 20% do not support the involvement of horses in sport in any way. And 40% would only do so if welfare was improved. So that's 60%, 6 in 10 people who are not happy with the status quo. And really, interestingly, people within the equestrian sector had similar views. Now, any survey is only a snapshot in time, but these results are very similar to results from the surveys that we carried out in 2022 and 2023. So the dial hasn't shifted in that 2-year period, and that would indicate this is not a snapshot in time, but something that is deeper rooted. So what do the public think about racing? This data, or these data, was taken from surveys undertaken by an independent company on behalf of the FEI's Equine Ethics and Wellbeing Commission in 2022, and involved 14,000 members of the general public from 14 countries across the globe. Respondents were asked whether they had concerns about equine welfare in various horse sports. And as you can see, racing, depicted by the green dotted line, is about average amongst horse sports. But despite being average, this figure is still startling, as 2/3 of the people across the 14 countries asked had concerns about equine welfare in racing. So what, you might ask? Maybe the public really just don't know what care racehorses and sport horses get every day. And perhaps some of us don't think that our sector has a serious challenge when it comes in relation to public acceptance. And does that matter? And what actually happens if we lose public acceptance? Well, the stark reality is that the consequences can be profound. Greyhound racing has been banned in some parts of Australia and the US, and is under growing threat here in the UK. Jumps racing has been banned in most parts of Australia, and following this summer's Paris Olympics, equestrianism has now been lost from the sport of modern pentathlon. Animal welfare concerns, at least in part, underpinned the loss of all of these sports. And once a sport or an industry is lost, it is very rarely resurrected. So I think this shows that the magnitude of threat is real, and it is now. And the key issue is for all to recognise, and everyone in equestrianism to recognise, is that we all, organisations and individuals, have a control of the balance of our sport's social licence or our public acceptance. So where are the goalposts in terms of influencing acceptance of equestrianism? We know from other industries that public acceptance is heavily based on trust. And this image shows the 6 key attributes that feed into trust. One of our recommendations to achieve these attributes is to do something, because as we've heard from Bob, this is fundamental. This is absolutely not an exercise solely in good communications. It is vital that we act too, and then in our communications we can talk about what we are doing. Shared values are vitally important in terms of maintaining public trust, but clearly we can't share the values of the public unless we know what they are. So we need to start with researching public sentiment. And a great example of this is a research project that was initiated by World Horse Welfare last year with significant support from the Racing Foundation that has involved a broad cross-section of the equestrian sector in the UK. We have been working with an engagement science company in Australia called Vaconic, and earlier this year they ran a large UK public survey. They have since undertaken some really sophisticated analysis of the data that helps explain the relationship between all the measures in the survey and how they influence acceptance. The methodology they adopted has been widely and successfully used across the globe in other sectors with public acceptance issues, including the mining and egg industries and the live export of animals. And given the limitations of time, I'm just going to present the top line results today. This slide shows the results of trust in and acceptance of horse sport overall in the UK, presented on a scale that runs from 1 to 5. And as you can see, trust sits at just over 3, a bit above live export in Australia, which these researchers viewed as a solid foundation of trust with community on which to build and strengthen the relationship, although there is room, indeed a need, to improve this score over time to buffer sport from future potential headwinds. And acceptance sits at about 3.2, which was viewed as being a solid level of acceptance with strong opportunity for improvement over time. So, what are the main drivers of acceptance of horse sport in the UK? This research has confirmed that trust is a major driver of acceptance. And the big advantage of this work is that it has quantified this relationship and identified what the major drivers of both trust and acceptance of horse sport in the UK are and their relative importance. And these results will allow sport to focus the strategy on factors that are of greatest importance to the general public. And if research is repeated, then to quantify that progress. So here is what the research has identified as the main drivers of trust. Each blue box shows the overall theme of multiple questions from the survey that all measured the same topic, but in slightly different ways. These are social importance, procedural fairness, transparency, regulation, and distributional fairness, where procedural fairness is about how much the public feel the sport is listening to their concerns and how responsive they are to them, and distributional fairness is about how equitably the public feel any benefits that the horse sport generates is shared with the wider community. The numbers show the strength of each pathway relative to all the others in the model, which provides us with a prioritized set of levers to be able to pull to increase public trust and acceptance. You will notice that some of the themes are connected, such as transparency, which will also influence procedural fairness. So by acting in one area, we should see progress in others. There are also some themes that drove public acceptance directly and not via trust. And this is the full path model that resulted from the data. But Vaconic have recommended at its best, at least initially, to concentrate on the drivers of acceptance that work via trust. So you might be surprised, if the slides work, that the statistical analysis did not bring out equine welfare as a specific driver of trust or acceptance. But without doubt, it is threaded through this model in multiple places. Survey respondents sent a very clear message regarding their expectations of the industry when it comes to welfare, which shone through in their responses to many of the questions. It's also self-evident that welfare underpins many of the drivers of trust and acceptance shown on the slide here. For example, procedural fairness, which is about industry responsiveness to public concerns, many of which focus on welfare. Transparency about injuries and fatalities, where the relationship to welfare is obvious. But it's worth noting that this is the welfare item that most energized respondents. On closer analysis of the data, it is evident that this should be interpreted as being representative of a broad family of welfare concerns. Regulation And given the level of public concern about welfare, it is obvious that the public will expect that regulations will cover welfare and finally breeding, which was only likely to be acceptable if welfare is good. Now, we will all be all too familiar with the adverse headlines, media headlines that have made it into the mainstream media recently in relation to a broad range of disciplines, including racing, endurance, show jumping, and dressage. And only in August, the Daily Telegraph published an article questioning whether people should be riding horses at all. So taken in conjunction with the Vaconic research, I hope that we would all agree that we cannot ignore the importance of maintaining and building public trust in our sport, and that we will be so much more effective if we do this together. Now, it's certainly encouraging that we currently have a solid base of public trust to build upon. And we know there is so much good practice and good stories to talk about within our sport. But the public trust dial can go both ways, and we need to strive to ensure that we move this in our favour.